Fidel Castro, the Cuban revolutionary who ruled as a polarizing dictator from 1959 to 2008, is a figure shrouded in blood and controversy. His regime was marked by brutal executions, political purges, and relentless campaign of repression that silenced dissent with firing squads, torture, and imprisonment. From the mass executions of Batista loyalists in 1959 to the imprisonment of thousands of political opponents, Castro's legacy is stained with violence that claimed countless lives. In this chilling documentary, we dive deep into the psyche of a man who wielded power like a blade, using the lens of psychology and psychoanalysis to unravel why Castro orchestrated these atrocities, how he chose his victims, and what drove him to rule through terror. Why Fidel Castro? Because his crimes aren't just historical footnotes. They're a psychological labyrinth, a twisted tapestry of ideology, paranoia, and power lust that makes him a haunting case study. His methods were surgical yet savage, firing squads that mowed down hundreds in the early days of the revolution, public executions staged like grim theater, and a security apparatus that crushed dissent with an iron grip. Picture this: Havana, 1959. The air is thick with gunpowder and fear. Men, some guilty, some innocent, are lined up against a blood-splattered wall, their eyes wide with terror as Castro's rebels shout, "Perdin," to the wall. The crack of rifles echoes through the streets. Bodies crumple into mass graves, and the crowd roars, some in rage, others in twisted glee. Castro's violence wasn't random. It was calculated, rooted in a mind shaped by trauma, ambition, and a warped sense of justice. That's why we're here, to dissect the monster behind the myth. Let's start at the beginning, because monsters aren't born, they're forged. Fidel Alejandro Castro Ruz came into the world on August 13th, 1926, on a sugarcane plantation in Byron, Cuba, the illegitimate son of a wealthy Spanish farmer and a household servant. From a psychoanalytic perspective, this origin story is a powder keg. Being born out of wedlock in a deeply Catholic society likely planted seeds of shame and inferiority, what Freud might call a narcissistic wound. Castro's early years were marked by instability. Sent away at 6 to live with a teacher, then shuffled through strict Jesuit boarding schools where he was both brilliant and rebellious. Psychologists would point to this as a classic breeding ground for an external locus of control, where a child feels powerless and learns to dominate others to reclaim agency. By adolescence, Castro was a walking contradiction, a gifted student with a revolver in his dorm, a law scholar implicated in political murders. This duality screams a fragmented ego, what Jung would call a shadow self, that Castro embraced rather than suppressed. His involvement in violent student gangs and failed rebellions, like the 1947 attempt to invade the Dominican Republic, shows a young man addicted to chaos, chasing what psychologists call sensation-seeking behavior. He wasn't just rebelling against authority. He was auditioning to become it. The Jesuit priest who educated him noted his charisma, but also his volatility, a hallmark of narcissistic personality disorder. Castro's need for admiration and control was already simmering, waiting for a stage big enough to unleash it. Fast forward to the 1950s. Castro, now a lawyer, is radicalized by Cuba's corrupt Batista regime. His failed 1953 attack on the Moncada barracks lands him in prison, but it's here that his psyche takes a darker turn. Isolation fuels his grandiosity. He writes manifestos, casting himself as Cuba's savior. Psychoanalytically, this is a textbook case of messianic narcissism, where the individual believes they're destined to redeem the world, no matter the cost. When he's released and leads the Cuban Revolution to victory in 1959, the stage is set for his descent into tyranny. Castro's first act as leader? A bloodbath. He oversees the execution of over 300 Batista officials in mere months, with estimates of 550 by mid-1959. The scenes are gut-wrenching. Prisoners dragged to trenches under truck headlights, shot in batches as crowds cheer. One rebel executioner mutters, "I have a pain in my soul," but Castro shows no remorse. Why? Because his moral compass is warped by what psychologists call moral disengagement. He dehumanizes his victims, labeling them murderers who deserve it, a classic defense mechanism to justify atrocities. His public statement: "We are executing murderers, and they deserve it," is chilling not just for its coldness, but for its conviction. Castro's violence wasn't just about eliminating threats. It was a performance. Public executions, broadcast on radio and TV, were designed to instill fear and awe. From a psychological standpoint, this is terror management theory in action. By showcasing his power over life and death, Castro reinforced his godlike status while paralyzing dissent. His choice of victims, Batista loyalists, suspected spies, even dissident revolutionaries, reveals a paranoid streak. Human Rights Watch notes that thousands were jailed in abysmal prisons, harassed, or tortured for merely speaking out. Castro's paranoia likely stemmed from his own survival instinct, honed by over 600 CIA assassination attempts, from poisoned cigars to exploding seashells. Psychoanalytically, this paranoia points to a persecutory delusion, where the individual sees enemies everywhere, justifying extreme measures. Castro's security apparatus, trained by the KGB and East German Stasi, was a physical extension of this delusion, a web of surveillance and betrayal that crushed any whisper of opposition. His victims weren't chosen randomly. They were symbols of defiance, selected to send a message. When Lieutenant Enrique de Spain, accused of 53 murders, was executed at dawn for TV cameras, he was allowed a final cigarette and a note to his son, a grim spectacle orchestrated to maximize public impact. Let's talk about the killings themselves, because they're where Castro's psyche bears its teeth. The firing squads were his signature, but the details are what haunt. Victims were often tried in drumhead courts, kangaroo trials with no due process, convicted on flimsy evidence or none at all. Eyewitnesses describe men pleading for mercy, their voices drowned by rebel shouts. One survivor, Armando Valladares, a political prisoner, recalls the murder of a 16-year-old cellmate, Roberto Lopez Chavez. In prison, a boy beaten and left to die for refusing to renounce his beliefs. Police reports from the time, cited by Amnesty International, document torture, electric shocks, beatings, and starvation in cells crawling with rats. Castro's methods reflect what psychologists call sadistic personality disorder, a trait where inflicting suffering brings pleasure or validation. He didn't just want his enemies dead. He wanted them broken, humiliated. The public nature of the executions, crowds chanting, "Kill them," as bodies piled up, fed his narcissistic need for adoration. Media quotes from the time capture the horror. Time magazine reported cops bursting into homes, dragging out Catholic activists, and dumping their stripped, tortured, and bullet-torn bodies to relatives hours later. Castro's hands-on role in these early purges, hugging grieving mothers while promising no mercy, shows a chilling blend of empathy and cruelty, a hallmark of psychopathy. So, why did Castro become this way? Psychology points to a cocktail of trauma, ideology, and personality disorders. His childhood rejection and rigid Jesuit upbringing likely fueled a deep-seated rage, what Freud would call repressed aggression. His Marxist-Leninist ideology, blended with Cuban nationalism, gave him a framework to channel that rage into a greater good. But it's the narcissistic and paranoid traits that drove the bus. Castro saw himself as Cuba's messiah, but also as a target surrounded by traitors. This duality, savior and victim, created a feedback loop where every act of violence reinforced his sense of destiny. His choice of victims was deeply personal. Batista's men were the obvious first targets, but as his rule hardened, he turned on allies, intellectuals, even priests, anyone who challenged his narrative. This aligns with splitting, a psychoanalytic defense where the individual sees others as all good or all evil, with no gray. Castro's Cuba had no room for nuance. You were with him or against him. His methods evolved over time, from chaotic firing squads to sophisticated repression, but the goal remained the same: control through fear. Castro was never caught or tried. He ruled until 2008, when failing health forced him to cede power to his brother Raul. He died in 2016 at 90, a natural death that felt like a cosmic injustice to his victims. Unlike serial killers who face justice, Castro's end was quiet, almost anticlimactic. No handcuffs, no courtroom drama, just an old man fading into history. But his legacy lingers like a ghost. Amnesty International called his rule a tale of two worlds, where social reforms coexisted with systemic repression. The Guardian noted Havana's mourning in 2016, with some Cubans weeping for their Fidelista hero, while others whisper his ruthless oppression. Philosophically, Castro's story is a meditation on power and morality from an existentialist lens. He embodies the absurd hero, a man who created meaning in a chaotic world by imposing his will no matter the cost. But this heroism is tainted by what Nietzsche might call the will of power gone feral, a drive that consumed not just his enemies but Cuba's soul. His belief in revolutionary justice as moral conviction raises a haunting question. Can evil be justified by intent? Castro saw himself as a liberator, but his methods mirror the tyrants he despised, a paradox that Sartre would argue traps him in bad faith, denying his own contradictions. His end, unpunished, forces us to grapple with justice itself. Is it enough that history judges him, that his name is synonymous with both hope and horror? Or does his escape from earthly reckoning prove the universe's indifference? Castro's life reminds us that power, unchecked, becomes a mirror for our darkest impulses: narcissism, paranoia, cruelty. His story isn't just a warning. It's a scream from the abyss, urging us to question the monsters we create and the ones we become.